Choi Dae-jung looked at Nia Crowder in her handmade midnight blue dress, leaned close to her ear, and said she was too fat to sit at his table. She picked up her clutch and walked out of the finest restaurant in Seoul like she owned the building. The woman who walked out that Friday night was not the same woman who had walked in. She was better. Nia Crowder crossed the marble lobby of Seoul's most photographed rooftop restaurant at 9:14 p.m., with her wrap dress draped around her curves like she had commissioned the fabric herself, which, for the record, she had. Midnight blue. Hand-blocked. A pattern she'd stayed up 3 nights designing, pressing each stamp by hand in her Atlanta studio, because she wanted something that felt like the ocean at the moment, just before it decided to swallow you whole. She had worn it for a man who did not deserve to see it. Behind her, at table 7, Dae-jung was still sitting, still smiling at his colleagues, still holding the glass of wine he had not offered to refill for her. He was handsome in the way of men who have always been told so. Smooth jaw, careful hair. He had pursued her for 3 weeks with the focused, charming attention of a man who wanted something. She had believed, foolishly and briefly, that the something was her. She found out at 9:12 p.m. exactly what it had been about. They were approaching his colleague's table when he leaned down to her ear, voice low, smile perfectly undisturbed. "You know, I didn't realize how big you'd look in this lighting. Maybe you should stay near the bar." "Maybe you should stay near the bar." Nia went very still. The kind of still that has nothing to do with calm. She picked up her clutch. She said, "Excuse me a moment." She walked past the bar, past the orchid display near the elevator, and directly out of the building. The night air hit her face like a small mercy. She pulled out her phone and texted her cousin Tasha, "I need wine and a plane ticket home." Tasha's response came in 11 seconds. On the way. Also, what did he do? Nia slid into the back of a cab and gave the driver her hotel address. She held her clutch in her lap and watched Seoul blur past the window, all lit up and indifferent. And she did not cry. Not because she wasn't hurt. She was hurt in the deep, quiet way that doesn't make noise. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone you've been carrying so long you forget it isn't supposed to be there. She'd been here before. Not Seoul, not this particular cruelty delivered in a whisper with a smile still attached. But this feeling of being too much of the wrong thing and not enough of the right one, she knew that one by heart. At table 7, Dae-jung finally noticed the empty chair. At table 14, Choi Gil-soo was still thinking about the dress. He had noticed her the way you notice a fire in a room full of furniture. Not because you are looking for it, but because something in you simply registers heat. He had been in the middle of a conversation about shipping logistics he had stopped caring about 20 minutes ago when the movement caught his eye. A woman, walking, not hurrying, not stumbling, not performing distress for the audience already watching her, though some of them were. Just walking, spine straight, chin level. The fabric of her dress moving around her like it had been given instructions. She stepped through the door and was gone. And Choi Gil-soo, who had not been genuinely curious about a person in longer than he could honestly account for, found himself watching that door for a full 4 seconds after she disappeared. Something about it unsettled him, not in a way he could name, more like a calculation that wouldn't resolve, a variable he hadn't accounted for. He did not like variables. Hyung. His junior associate Byun Seok-jun had the expression of a man who had asked a question and received silence. "The Busan contract," Gil-soo said. "Send it to my office Monday. We're done here." He stood. His chair did not scrape. Everything about Choi Gil-soo moved without friction. 14 years of being the kind of man other men watched carefully had seen to that. Tall, composed. The particular stillness of someone who has decided that the most powerful thing in any room is whatever doesn't need to prove itself. He did not go looking for her. That was not who he was. But he paused at the host stand on his way out, under the pretense of retrieving a card he had not actually left there. "The woman who just left," he said, voice entirely neutral. "In the blue dress. Do you know who she is?" The host blinked. "A guest's companion, I believe, sir. She—" A small hesitation. "She left early." "I can see that," Gilsu said. He walked out into the same night air she had walked into 14 minutes earlier. His car was waiting. He got in. He thought about the dress, the entire drive home, the fabric, the pattern. He had spent enough years in the textile industry to recognize handwork when he saw it, and what had been on that dress was not manufactured. Someone had made it by hand, with patience, with intention, the kind of craft that takes something out of you and leaves something better behind. He thought about it twice more before his building came into view. For Choi Gilsu, that was the equivalent of an obsession. He did not examine that too closely. Nia was on her second glass of wine when Tasha arrived at the hotel room door with a plastic bag from the convenience store downstairs. It contained 1 packet of shrimp crackers, 2 banana milk cartons, and a bag of Pepero that Tasha had clearly already opened. "Talk," Tasha said, dropping onto the bed. Nia told her. Tasha was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. This was, for Tasha, an unprecedented silence. "He said what?" "He said I should stay near the bar. In front of people. Before we even got to the table." Tasha opened the shrimp crackers with the focused energy of a woman redirecting her violence into a snack. "Okay, I need you to know that I am being very calm right now. I am choosing peace. I am a peaceful woman. You are absolutely not." "I am not," Tasha agreed. "Nia, baby, you wore the ocean dress, for him." "I know. The one you didn't sleep for 3 nights making." "Tasha, the one that deserves to be in a museum. Please stop." "I'm just saying." She pointed a cracker at her. "The dress deserved better. You deserved better. And that man—" She stopped, reconsidered. "That man is going to think about you for the rest of his life, and it is going to haunt him like a gospel choir at midnight." Nia laughed before she meant to. A real one, small and involuntary. "There she is," Tasha said, satisfied. They sat in the kind of quiet that only comes from 15 years of friendship, eating crackers and banana milk in Seoul at 10 o'clock at night. And Nia let herself feel it, the hurt, the humiliation, the familiar stone of it pressing against her ribs. And then, carefully, she set it down. Not forever. She knew better than that. But for tonight. She looked at the midnight blue dress draped over the chair by the window. She had made something beautiful. That was still true. No one could sit at any table and take that from her. Her phone buzzed. "Daejung, can we talk?" She turned it face down. "Good," Tasha said, watching her. "You couldn't even see the screen." "I didn't need to." Outside, Seoul kept its lights burning. Somewhere across the city, in a penthouse Nia Crowder had never heard of, and would not have believed she'd ever see the inside of, Choi Gilsu sat at his desk and pulled up the restaurant's reservation system. Not because he was looking for her, because he was thinking about the dress. That was what he told himself. His clock read 10:47 p.m. By morning he would have her name. Hello and welcome to Afro-Korean series channel. It's lovely to have you here. Sit back and enjoy this story. You'd love it. Choi Gilsu's assistant, Park Hyun-na, had worked for him for 6 years. In that time, she had tracked down a missing shipment of Belgian linen at 3 in the morning, rescheduled a board meeting around a typhoon warning, and once, without being asked, located the exact vintage thimble he had been searching for across 4 different countries. She was not surprised when he called her at 7:04 a.m. on a Saturday. She was mildly surprised by the request. "A textile artist," she repeated, her voice careful in the way of someone who has learned to repeat instructions back slowly. "American. She was at John's last night. Blue dress. Handmade fabric. Yes. That's everything you have. That's everything I need. She called back in 43 minutes. Her name was Nia Crowder, Atlanta-based, independent fabric designer and textile artist with a growing international following. Currently in Seoul for a 2-week pop-up residency at a small creative space in Mapogu. She had a website. She had a waiting list. She had, according to 2 separate features in niche design publications, a way with pattern work that one reviewer had described as like someone bottled nostalgia and pressed it into cloth. Gil-soo read the file twice. Then he told Hyun-ah to arrange a meeting, creative consultation, potential commission for the Choi Global Spring launch. Shall I have her come to the office? Hyun-ah asked. No, he said. Her studio. Nia almost didn't answer. She was in the middle of a dye bath. Hands stained indigo to the wrist, hair wrapped in an old scarf she'd had since college, wearing a paint-splattered oversized shirt that said Atlanta across the chest in letters that had mostly faded to a whisper. She was not dressed for company. She was not in the mood for company. She had spent the morning ignoring 4 texts from Dae-jung and 1 very long voicemail from her mother back in Atlanta, who had somehow already heard something had happened. Tasha, undoubtedly, and wanted to discuss it at length. Her phone rang. Unknown Seoul number. She answered it because she was elbow-deep in a dye bath, and it gave her an excuse not to think. Ms. Crowder. The voice was low, measured, accented in the particular way of someone who had learned English formally and then lived in it long enough to make it their own. My name is Park Hyuna. I'm calling on behalf of Choi Gil-soo, CEO of Choi Global. He would like to arrange a meeting to discuss a potential commission. Would tomorrow afternoon work? Nia looked at her indigo hands. Choi Global, she said. Yes? She knew the name. Everyone in textiles knew the name. Choi Global was the kind of company whose materials ended up in the collections of designers she had been studying since she was 19 years old, cutting pictures out of magazines in her grandmother's living room in Atlanta. Tomorrow afternoon works, she said. She hung up and looked at Tasha, who was sitting, cross-legged on the studio floor eating the last of the pepero and watching her with open interest. What? Nia said. Nothing, Tasha said. You're just smiling. I'm not smiling. You're a little smiling. Nia turned back to her dye bath. Choi Global wants a commission. Tasha sat up straight. How big is Choi Global? Big. How big is big? Tasha. I'm just asking. Very big, Nia said. Now stop eating my pepero. He arrived the following afternoon, exactly on time. Nia was still in the studio, still working, still wearing the paint-splattered shirt. She had tidied the space as much as a working studio could be tidied, which was to say the bolts of fabric were now stacked instead of scattered, and she had found a second chair. She heard the knock, looked down at herself, and opened the door anyway. The man on the other side was not what she had pictured when she heard the words, CEO of Choi Global. She had pictured someone older, softer, the kind of executive who had traded his edges for a corner office. This man had kept his edges. Tall, dark suit, no tie, the kind of face that gave nothing away. Composed in a way that felt less like politeness and more like a decision. He looked at her the way people look at a piece of work they are trying to assess. Careful, unhurried. Ms. Crowder, he said. Mr. Choi. She stepped back to let him in. You want coffee? I have instant. It's not great. Something moved briefly across his face. Not quite amusement. No, thank you. He stepped into the studio and stopped. She watched him take it in. The bolts of fabric, the dye samples hanging from a line across the ceiling, the pattern sketches pinned to every available wall, the sewing table with its 3 different machines in a row. His eyes moved slowly, methodically, the way she imagined he read a balance sheet. Then they stopped on the piece she'd been working on that morning, half finished, indigo and burnt orange, a pattern built around interlocking circles that pulled apart and reformed depending on where your eye landed. He looked at it for a long moment. "You designed this morning," he said. It wasn't a question. "How do you know that?" "The dye is still wet on the edges." He glanced at her hands. "And your fingers." She looked down. She had scrubbed them twice, and they were still faintly blue at the knuckles. "Observant," she said. "It's useful," he said, and finally turned to face her fully. "I'd like to discuss a potential licensing arrangement for the Choi Global Spring Collection. Your pattern vocabulary is distinct. We've been looking for something that doesn't read as derivative." Nia crossed her arms. "What's the usage scope?" He blinked. Barely. But she caught it. "Excuse me?" "Usage scope," she said. "Exclusive or non-exclusive, geographic limitations, print run caps, derivative works clause." She tilted her head. "You did want to discuss a commission?" "I did," he said, and now there was something in his voice she couldn't quite name, something that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. "Then those are the first questions," she said. "I don't license blind, not to anyone." A pause. He looked at her the way the man at the restaurant had not looked at her, like she was the most interesting thing in the room, and he was trying to decide what to do about that. "Non-exclusive to start," he said. "Geographic scope negotiable. No derivative works without written approval." He paused. "Those are reasonable terms." "I know they are," Nia said. "I wrote them." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people are recalibrating. Then Choi Gil-soo did something she did not expect. He pulled out the chair she had set out for him, sat down and said, "Walk me through your process, from concept to finished cloth. Not show me your portfolio, not what are your rates. Walk me through your process." Nia uncrossed her arms. She sat down across from him, and for the next 40 minutes she talked about fabric the way she only ever talked about it with people who understood it the way she did. Which was to say, almost never. He listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions. Both were precise enough that she had to think before answering. At the end of it, she named her licensing fee. He didn't flinch. "That's acceptable," he said. "It's non-negotiable," she said. "I said it was acceptable," he said. "I didn't ask you to negotiate." She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them looked away first, because neither of them was the kind of person who looked away first, and they were both, in that moment, just beginning to understand that about each other. "I'll have my assistant send contracts by end of week," he said, standing. "I'll have my lawyer review them," she said. "You have a lawyer?" "I have Tasha," she said. "She watched a lot of legal dramas. Close. Enough." He paused at the door, and she saw it again, that almost not quite thing that moved across his face like weather passing. "Ms. Crowder," he said. "Mr. Choi. Your work is exceptional." She held his gaze. "I know." He left. The door closed behind him. Nia sat in her studio in the quiet he had left behind and looked at the indigo piece still drying on the table. Her phone buzzed. "Tasha." "Well?" She typed back. He didn't flinch at my rate. 3 seconds. "Tasha. Marry him." Nia set her phone face down and smiled at the fabric. Outside in the car, Choi Gil-soo sat with his hands folded and stared at nothing while Seok-jun navigated Seoul traffic. He had not told her he recognized the dress from the restaurant. He would not yet. But he thought about the way she had said "I know" twice without hesitation, without apology. And something in his chest shifted half a degree in a direction he had not given it permission to move. He reached into his jacket pocket, found an antacid, ate it. The lunch meeting had included mildly spiced jjigae, and he was absolutely fine. He simply preferred to be prepared. He stared out the window. "I know." He thought about that the entire drive back. The contracts arrived on Thursday. Nia was expecting standard licensing language, usage terms, payment schedule, exclusivity clauses, the kind of document that required reading twice and signing once. What she was not expecting was the addendum on page 9. She read it once, read it again, set it down, picked it up. "Tasha," she said. Tasha was eating ramen at the hotel desk and did not look up. Come read this. I'm eating. Tasha." Something in her voice made Tasha set down her chopsticks. She crossed the room, read page 9, read it again, and then sat down on the edge of the bed with the expression of a woman whose ramen had just become irrelevant. "Is this?" she started. "Yes." "He's asking you to—" "Yes." "For 3 months." "Yes." "And he's offering—" Tasha looked at the number, looked at Nia, looked at the number again. "Nia, this is not a licensing fee." "No," Nia said, "it is not." The addendum, written in the precise, measured language of a man who said exactly what he meant and nothing more, proposed the following. In addition to the licensing arrangement, Choi Global required a designer in residence for the duration of their spring collection development. 3 months. Seoul-based. The compensation figure was not the kind of number Nia wrote down. It was the kind of number she would have to say out loud twice before she believed it. There was also, at the bottom of page 9, a secondary clause, brief, almost casual in its phrasing, which she suspected was deliberate. Given the upcoming Choi Family Foundation Gala and associated public engagements, the designer in residence may be asked to attend select events in a professional and social capacity as a representative of the Choi Global Creative Partnership. Professional and social capacity. "He wants arm candy," Tasha said. "He wants a business arrangement," Nia said. "That is a very expensive business arrangement." "Yes." "For 3 months. Tasha, you keep saying the same things." "Because I keep reading the same page," Tasha pointed at the document. "Nia, what is actually being proposed here?" Nia was quiet for a moment. Outside the hotel window, Seoul moved through its afternoon, indifferent, relentless, beautiful in the way of cities that do not require your approval to exist. "A contract," she said finally, "a professional arrangement that happens to include public appearances." "And you're considering it?" "I'm considering it. Because of the money." Nia looked at her. "Because of the work," she said. 3 months with full access to Choi Global's material archive. Do you understand what that means? Fabrics I have never touched, resources I have never had, the kind of creative access that takes most designers a decade to earn. Tasha was quiet. "The money is also good," Nia added. "The money is spectacular," Tasha said. "Yes." Another silence. "He's not bad looking," Tasha offered. "That is completely irrelevant. I'm just saying." "It's irrelevant, Tasha." Tasha picked up her ramen. "Call him." She called him the next morning. He answered on the second ring, which she noted without comment. "Mr. Choi. Ms. Crowder." His voice was the same as it had been in the studio, low, unhurried, giving nothing away. "You have questions about the addendum." "I have one question about the addendum," she said. "Ask it." The social appearances clause. What exactly does professional and social capacity mean in practice? A pause, brief, measured. "It means," he said, "that my family is not uncomplicated, and certain public engagements are easier to navigate with a credible professional partnership established." She absorbed that. "You need a buffer." Another pause, longer this time. "I need someone who can hold a room without being managed." Nia was quiet for a moment. "That's a more honest answer than I expected." "I find dishonesty inefficient," he said. "And the rest of it, the residency, the archive access, the commission, that's all real." "Everything in that contract is real," he said. "I don't propose arrangements I don't intend to honor." She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why. She had believed Dae-jung too, and look how that had ended. But this felt different in a way she couldn't yet name. Less like charm and more like architecture. Solid, load-bearing, built to hold something. "I'll need 2 adjustments to the social clause," she said. "Tell me." "First, I decide what I wear. No stylist, no brand requirements, no one telling me what I look like in any lighting." She let that land. "Second, if I am ever uncomfortable at any event for any reason, I leave. No questions, no negotiations, no performance." The silence on his end was not hesitation. It felt more like recognition. "Agreed," he said. "Both terms." "Then I'll sign by end of day," she said. "Ms. Crowder." "Mr. Choi." The adjustment about the stylist, a beat. Was that directed at something specific? She smiled and she made sure he could hear it. "Everything in that contract is real, Mr. Choi. I don't make adjustments I don't intend to enforce." She hung up, sat with it for a moment, then picked up her sketchbook because her hands needed something to do, and her mind was already moving toward what 3 months in Seoul could mean for her work. The patterns she hadn't let herself attempt yet, the scale she hadn't had resources for, the creative risks that had been sitting in the back of her sketchbook, like promises she hadn't found the right moment to keep. She was doing this for the work. She told herself that with the full confidence of a woman who was mostly telling the truth. Across the city, Choi Gil-soo set his phone down. Seok-jun appeared in the doorway. "The Crowder contracts?" "She'll sign today." Seok-jun nodded, started to leave. "She negotiated 2 amendments," Gil-soo said, without turning, from the window. "Should I flag them for legal?" "No." A pause. "Add them to the standard terms going forward." Seok-jun stared at the back of his head. "Both of them." "Both of them." After Seok-jun left, Gil-soo was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the way her voice had shifted on that last line. The smile underneath it, pointed and precise, aimed at something he hadn't disclosed and she had known anyway. He thought about the adjustment she had made about the stylist. The way she had let it land without explaining it. The way she hadn't needed to. He had spent 14 years in rooms full of people who needed managing, who needed coaxing, reassuring, repositioning, who required careful handling to function. She had walked into a contract negotiation, identified the thing he hadn't said, named it without naming it, and hung up. He stood at the window for another moment. Seoul spread below him, all steel and light and perpetual motion, completely indifferent to the fact that something had just shifted in this office. Something small, something he didn't have a category for yet. He told himself it was professional respect. He was almost convinced. He reached for his antacid, set it back down, picked it up again. The afternoon meeting had included absolutely nothing spicy. He was simply being thorough. The penthouse had 12 rooms. Nia counted them on the first day, because it was either that or stand in the marble entryway and let her face do something embarrassing. 12 rooms. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. A kitchen that looked like it had never seen a grocery bag. A studio space, already set up, she noticed, with a work table at the exact right height, a dye sink, and bolts of base fabric in the neutral tones she preferred, that looked directly out over the Han River. She stood in the studio doorway for a long moment. "You had this set up," she said. Gil-soo was behind her, a precise 3 feet of professional distance. "Hyuna sent over your supply list from the Mapo residency." "I didn't send a supply list." "She compiled one from your website's process documentation." Nia turned to look at him. He met her gaze with the composed neutrality of a man who saw nothing remarkable about having his assistant reverse engineer a textile artist's studio, requirements from her public internet presence. "That's either very efficient or very unsettling," she said. "I find they're often the same thing," he said. She turned back to the river view. "Okay," she said quietly, to herself more than to him. "Is it acceptable?" he asked. She looked at the work table, the dye sink, The light coming off the Han River at 4 in the afternoon, gold and relentless, falling across the base fabrics like it had been specifically arranged. "It's acceptable," she said. She moved in that afternoon. The first week was professional, precisely, determinedly professional. They shared the penthouse the way two people share a library, present in the same space, operating in parallel, occasionally intersecting over something functional. He left for the Choi Global offices at 7 a.m. and returned between 8 and 9 in the evening. She kept studio hours that started before he left and ended when she remembered to eat. They had dinner together 4 times that week because the housekeeper, a compact and completely unintimidated woman named Kwon Soon-yi, put food on the table at 7:30, whether anyone asked her to or not. The first dinner was quiet. The second dinner, Nia asked about the Choi Global Archive, and he talked about textile sourcing for 40 minutes in a way that made her forget she was supposed to be keeping a professional distance. The third dinner, he asked about her grandmother's living room in Atlanta, because she had mentioned it once in passing, and he had apparently filed it somewhere. She looked at him across the table. "You remembered that? You said it in the context of how you developed your pattern instincts," he said. It seemed relevant. To what? A pause. To understanding your work. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "Her name was Grandma Dolores," Nia said. "She had a sewing room off the kitchen that smelled like cedar and starch. She made everything, curtains, quilts, church clothes. I used to sit under her cutting table and watch her feet move." She paused. "She never once told me what I was making. She just let me make it." Gilsoo was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like someone who understood how things grow." Nia looked at him. That was not the response she had expected. She had expected something polite, something professional. "Yes," she said. That's exactly what she understood. The fourth dinner, Soon-yi made doenjang jjigae and watched Nia eat 2 bowls of it with the focused satisfaction of a woman whose opinion was already decided. Gilsoo ate 1 bowl and reached very discreetly for his antacid. Nia watched him from across the table. "Is it spicy?" "No," he said. "Your eyes are watering." "They are not." "Gilsoo." It was the first time she had used his name without the honorific. They both heard it. Neither acknowledged it. "It is mildly spiced," he said, with great dignity. "Soon-yi," Nia called toward the kitchen. "How spicy is the jjigae?" Soon-yi appeared in the doorway, looked at Gilsoo, looked at Nia. "Standard," she said, and disappeared. "Standard," Nia repeated. "I have a sensitive palate," Gilsoo said. "You run a company that sources chili fabric dyes." "That is entirely unrelated." Nia pressed her lips together, did not smile, almost succeeded. "Not a word," he said. "I didn't say anything." "You were thinking it loudly." She picked up her spoon. "I think you should know," she said, "that I grew up eating my Aunt Cheryl's jerk chicken every Sunday. This is not spicy." "Good for you," he said, with great feeling, and reached for his water. She laughed. A real one, surprised out of her, warm and unguarded, the kind she hadn't expected to produce in this apartment, at this table, across from this man. He looked at her when she laughed. He looked at her like the variable had just resolved. It was Soon-yi who told her about the thimbles. She mentioned it the way Soon-yi mentioned most things, without preamble, while wiping down the kitchen counter, as though it was simply a fact of the household that Nia should be aware of. "The case in the study," Soon-yi said. "Don't touch. He dusts it himself." Nia looked up from her sketchbook. "What case?" "Thimbles," Soon-yi said. 43 of them, every country he's ever worked in. A pause. "He thinks nobody notices." "Does he know you know?" Soon-yi looked at her with the expression of a woman who had been running this household for 9 years. "He knows I know. We don't discuss it." Nia thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, after dinner, She found the study. The case was on the shelf between two industry reports, glass-fronted, small, easy to miss if you weren't looking. 43 thimbles, brass, silver, ceramic, painted enamel, some ornate, some plain. All of them clearly chosen rather than collected, each one individual, specific, the kind of thing you pick up because it catches something in you that you don't entirely understand. She stood there looking at them for a long moment. Then she heard him in the doorway. She turned. He was leaning against the doorframe, jacket off, the composed neutrality slightly less composed than usual. Watching her look at the thing he kept in the room, nobody was supposed to notice. "Soon-yi," he said, without heat. "She didn't tell me what they were," Nia said. "Just not to touch the case." A pause. 43 countries, she said. 44, he said. "I found one in Atlanta last year. I haven't added it yet." She looked at him. He looked back. The professional distance, the careful, maintained, contractual 3 feet of it, felt suddenly very thin. "Why thimbles?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that isn't avoidance. The kind that means someone is deciding how honest to be. "My grandmother sewed," he said finally. "She kept her thimbles in a line on the windowsill. I used to count them." A pause. "When she died, I couldn't find them. I don't know what happened to them." Nia said nothing. She understood the kind of loss that attaches itself to small objects. The cedar smell of Grandma Dolores's sewing room. The specific sound of fabric being cut on a wooden table. "The one from Atlanta," she said. "What does it look like?" He crossed to the desk, opened the drawer, set it on the surface between them. Brass, small, a ring of hand-stamped flowers around the band, slightly uneven, the way things are when someone makes them by hand. Nia looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at him. "A market off Auburn Avenue," she said quietly. "There's a woman there. She makes them herself." Something moved across his face. Not the almost amusement she had catalogued in the studio, not the controlled neutrality of the boardroom. Something she hadn't seen yet, something that looked like being known. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly where I found it." The room was very quiet. "Gilsu," she said. "Nia." The professional distance had entirely ceased to exist, and they were both very aware of it, and neither of them moved and neither of them looked away, and the Han River kept doing what rivers do, moving, indifferent, patient, certain that eventually everything comes to the water. His hand was on the desk beside the thimble. Her hand was 6 inches from his. Neither of them closed the distance, but neither of them stepped back. The announcement went live on a Tuesday. It was not supposed to be an announcement. It was a photograph, taken at the Choi Global Foundation preview event the previous Friday, posted to the company's official social channels with a caption about the Spring Collection Creative Partnership. Nia in a burnt orange wrap dress she had made herself, standing beside Gilsu at the entrance of the gallery space, his hand at the small of her back in the way of a man who has made a decision about where his hand belongs. The caption said, "Creative Partner." The internet decided otherwise. By Wednesday morning it had been picked up by 3 Korean entertainment outlets, 1 fashion publication, and a lifestyle blogger with 400,000 followers who had written an entire post titled, "Who is the woman standing next to Choi Gilsu?" The comments were, in Tasha's professional assessment, a whole situation. Nia was in the studio when Tasha read her the comments over video call. She kept working. Her hands were steadier than she expected. "They're not all bad," Tasha said, in the tone of someone editing aggressively. "Read me the real ones." A pause. "Who is this woman and why is she next to him?" That's one. Another pause. "She's pretty, but she's not his type." That's 2. A longer pause. "Interesting choice. Very different." "Different," Nia said. "Yeah." She set down her brush, picked it up again. "How many good ones?" "A lot, actually," Tasha said. and her voice shifted into something genuine. A lot of them, Nia. She's stunning. That dress. Who made that dress? I've never seen him look at anyone like that. A pause. That last one has 4,000 likes. Nia said nothing. He's looking at you like that in the photo, Tasha said quietly. I need you to know that. Tasha. I'm just telling you what's in the picture. Nia looked at the Han River through the studio window. She thought about the 6 inches of space on the desk that neither of them had crossed 3 nights ago. She thought about the way he'd said her name in that study, Nia, like it was something he had been keeping in his mouth for a while and had finally decided to let out. It's a business arrangement, she said. Tasha was quiet for exactly the length of time it takes a person to decide not to say what they are thinking. Right, Tasha said. Choi Dae-jung called his brother at 9 a.m. on Wednesday. Gil-soo let it go to voicemail. Dae-jung called again at 9:04. Gil-soo answered. I saw the photo, Dae-jung said. No greeting. He had always skipped greetings when he was unsettled, which Gil-soo had catalogued at age 7 and found no less irritating at 31. Most people did, Gil-soo said. That's Nia Crowder. Yes. A pause that contained several things Dae-jung was deciding whether to say. We dated. I know. You know. I know, Gil-soo said again, in exactly the same tone, which was no tone at all. The silence on Dae-jung's end had a particular texture, the texture of a man recalibrating faster than he was comfortable with. How long have you known? Since the night at John's. Another silence, longer. You were there. Table 14. Hyung. Dae-jung. Gil-soo's voice did not change. It never changed. That was the thing about Gil-soo that had unsettled people since he was a child. Not that he got cold, but that he stayed level when everything else in the room was rising. Say what you called to say. A breath. She's not what you think she is. He stopped, started again. She's opportunistic. She moved fast, Hyung. This whole thing moved very fast and I think you should consider. Stop. The word landed like a door closing. She came to Seoul for a residency, Gil-soo said. I approached her about a commission. She negotiated her terms with more precision than my last 3 board members. She has been in this arrangement for 3 weeks and she has produced more creative work than our in-house team managed in 6 months. A pause. And you are calling me to suggest she is opportunistic. I'm just saying, you said she was too fat to sit at your table. The silence that followed was absolute. Dae-jung started. I was at table 14, Gil-soo said quietly. I watched her walk out. I watched you stay seated. Another pause, and this one had weight to it. Real weight. The kind that accumulates over years of watching someone be smaller than they should be. Don't call me about her again. He hung up. Seok-jun was in the doorway. He had the expression of a man who had heard everything and was processing it in real time. The Busan contract, Gil-soo said. Right, Seok-jun said, and disappeared. Nia found out on Thursday, not from Gil-soo, from Tasha, who had been sent a screenshot by someone who knew someone who had been in the Choi Global offices that week and overheard something in a corridor they probably weren't supposed to overhear. The screenshot was a second-hand account, imprecise. But the shape of it was clear enough. He said she was too fat to sit at his table, and Gil-soo told him not to call again. Nia read it twice, set her phone down, picked it up. She was in the studio. The burnt orange fabric from the foundation event was draped over the work table. She'd been making adjustments to the pattern. Her hands were still. He had known. At the restaurant. He had been there, and he had watched her walk out, and he had known who Dae-jung was, and he had said nothing. Then it hit her. Not the knowing, the other thing. The thing sitting right underneath it that she had somehow not let herself fully assemble until this moment. Dae-jung's brother. She was living in Dae-jung's brother's penthouse. She had eaten dinner across from Dae-jung's brother 4 times a week for 3 weeks. She had stood in Daejung's brother's study and looked at 43 thimbles and felt something she was still refusing to name. The man who had leaned down at Jeon's and told her she was too big to be seen. His brother had watched her walk out. His brother had found her. His brother had built her a studio at exactly the right height and said your work is exceptional without flinching. The symmetry of it was almost too much to hold. She picked up her phone and called him. He answered on the first ring. You were at table 14, she said. A pause, one beat. Yes? You knew who I was before Hyuna called me. Yes. You knew about Daejung. Yes. She took a breath. He's your brother. Yes. Say more than one word. A pause. Nia, he's your brother, she said again, and her voice was steady in the way that costs something. And you watched him do that. And you found me. And you built me a studio. And you sat across from me at dinner. And you never once said, you never told me that you knew who I was before any of this started. No, he said. I didn't. Why? Silence. The longest one he had ever given her. Gil-soo. Because, he said, and stopped. Started again. Because you walked out of that restaurant like you owned it, and I didn't want the first thing I said to you to be about him. A pause. He didn't deserve to be the reason we met. The studio was very quiet. I need to know, she said. If the commission was real. Yes. No pause, immediate. The archive access. Yes. The residency. Yes. His voice was still level, but there was something underneath it now, something that sounded like a man holding very still, because any movement might cost him something. Everything in that contract was real. Everything. But you knew? I knew. And you didn't tell me? No, he said, I didn't. She waited. The anger was real and valid, and she wasn't going to set it down just because the explanation was, unexpectedly, inconveniently, the most honest thing anyone had said to her in longer than she wanted to think about. I'm still angry, she said. I know, he said. Don't manage me. I'm not. You're using that voice. What voice? The one that's very calm and very careful and makes people feel like everything is under control. A pause. Is it working? No, she said. It's making it worse. Nia. And there it was again. Her name. The way he said it, like it meant something specific. I should have told you, that's all. I should have told you. She closed her eyes. The anger sat in her chest alongside something else she didn't have a name for yet. Something that had been building for 4 weeks in a penthouse in Seoul, across dinners and work tables, and 6 inches of space, and a brass thimble with hand-stamped flowers. I'll talk to you tonight, she said finally. Okay, he said. She hung up, looked at the burnt orange fabric on the table, picked up her brush. Her hands were not entirely steady, but she kept working, because that was what she did. That was what she had always done. Kept her hands moving even when everything else was uncertain, kept making something even when she wasn't sure what it would become. She hummed without realizing it. Something half-remembered, off-key. Her grandmother's church. In his office across the city, Gil-soo sat with his phone in his hand and did not reach for the antacid. He simply waited. He was already home when she came out of the studio. She hadn't planned it that way. She had intended to stay in the studio until she had decided exactly what she wanted to say and exactly how she wanted to say it. Organized, precise, no loose edges. That was how she handled the things that mattered. She didn't go into difficult conversations the way she went into a dye bath, hands first, color everywhere. She thought first. She prepared. But it was 9:30, and she was hungry, and the studio door opened onto the living room, and he was sitting at the kitchen table with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled, and 2 bowls of doenjang jjigae that Soon-yi had clearly left before departing for the evening. He looked up when she walked in. She looked at the 2 bowls. Soon-yi, he said, by way of explanation. She knew I'd be hungry. She knows everything, he said. I've stopped questioning it. Nia sat down. She looked at the jjigae. She picked up her spoon. They ate in silence for a moment. Real silence. Not the comfortable library silence of the first week, but the kind that has weight and shape and things moving underneath it. The inheritance clause, she said. She hadn't planned to open with that. It came out the way things come out when you have been holding them too long. He set his spoon down. Tell me about it, she said. A pause. How did you… Tasha, she said. She found a financial column, Korean business press, someone speculating about the Choi family succession structure, and a clause requiring a… She stopped, steadied. A clause requiring a settled personal life before full asset transfer. She sent it to me this afternoon. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the Han River kept its own counsel. Is it real? She said. Yes, he said. She nodded. Once. The way you nod when you already knew the answer and were hoping to be wrong. You told me your family was complicated. You said certain public engagements were easier to navigate with a credible professional partnership. I accepted that, she looked at him. You didn't tell me there was a formal financial clause attached, that this arrangement had a legal function you never disclosed. He was quiet. The social appearances, she said. The foundation gala, the public-facing partnership, that wasn't just about your family being difficult to navigate, was it? No, he said. It wasn't only that. So, when you came to my studio… The commission was real, he said immediately. The creative partnership was real. I came to your studio because of your work. That has not changed and it will not change. A pause. But I knew about the clause before I drafted the contract. And the social clause, the appearances, I structured those with the inheritance requirement in mind. She set her spoon down. She had been here before too. Not this kitchen, not this conversation, not this specific variety of finding out that the thing she had let herself believe in had a structural reason behind it that had nothing to do with her. But this feeling, the feeling of being useful, convenient, a solution to someone else's problem dressed up to look like a choice. She had been someone's answer before. She had sworn she would not do it again. Nia, he started. When did the clause expire? She said. Silence. She looked up at him. Tasha read the column carefully. There was a timeline. The transfer window. When did it close? He held her gaze. 6 weeks ago. She did the math. They were 8 weeks into the arrangement, the studio, the work table at the right height, the dinners, the thimble from Atlanta. The 6 inches of space neither of them had crossed. All of it happening 2 weeks after the clause had already expired. She stood up. You didn't tell me, she said. Her voice was very controlled. That was the most frightening thing about Nia Crowder when she was hurt. She got quieter, not louder, quieter, and stiller, and more precise, like something reducing down to its most essential form. The clause expired and you said nothing. No, he said, I didn't. Because by then it didn't matter, he said, and his voice had changed. The level composure still there, but something underneath it now, something pressing against the surface like water behind glass. Because I had stopped thinking about it. Because it had been irrelevant for weeks and I hadn't told you. Because I didn't want the conversation we're having right now. That's not a reason. It's not a good reason, he said. It's the true one. She was standing by the window. The Han River was black and glittering below, full of its own momentum, completely indifferent to the 2 people in the penthouse above it, trying to find their way through the dark. I told myself I was doing this for the work, she said. Not to him specifically. To the room, to herself. To the version of herself that had sat on a hotel bed eating shrimp crackers 3 weeks ago and decided to believe that something could be straightforward for once. And the work is real, I know that, but I also… She stopped. You also what? He said quietly. She didn't answer. Nia. He had moved. She hadn't heard him, but he was closer now. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel the shift in the room, the way you feel weather changing. "Look at me." She turned. His face had none of its usual management, none of the careful neutrality, none of the composed distance. He looked like a man who had finally stopped building walls and was standing in the open for the first time in a long time, uncertain of the ground. "I structured the contract around the clause," he said. "That is true, and I should have told you. That is also true. But I came to your studio because of your work, and I stayed because of you, and those two things are not the same, and I need you to understand that they are not the same." "Then why did you stay?" she said. "After the clause expired, you had what you needed. Why didn't you just restructure the arrangement? Send a new contract. Keep it clean." He looked at her, and in 14 years of boardrooms and negotiations and careful, composed silence, Choi Gil-soo had never once said the next thing out loud to anyone. Not to his family, not to Seok-jun, not to the woman he had almost married and hadn't been able to make himself feel anything real with. "Because you hum," he said. She blinked. "Off-key," he said. "Gospel hymns you don't know all the words to when you're anxious or thinking. You don't know you're doing it." A pause. "I started coming home earlier to hear it." The silence that followed was not the weighted, complicated silence of an hour ago. It was something else entirely, something that had no category yet. "That's," she started. "Embarrassing," he said. "I'm aware." I was going to say unexpected. Also accurate. She looked at him for a long moment. The anger was still there. It was real, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. The clause was real. The things he hadn't said were real. The dual motivation she hadn't been told about was real. But standing in this kitchen at 9:30 at night, with the Han River moving below them, and the jjigae going cold on the table, and this man telling her he had started coming home early to hear her hum off-key gospel hymns, she was finding it very difficult to hold all of that and this other thing simultaneously, and the other thing was winning. She didn't close the distance, but she sat back down at the table, picked up her spoon, looked at him. He sat down across from her. They ate. The silence between them now was different again. Not comfortable, not weighted, but suspended. Like a note held at the end of a song, waiting to resolve. She would not tell him tonight that she had already known about the clause for 3 days, that she had been waiting to see what he would do with the information before she said anything. That he had not known she knew, and he had come home and set out 2 bowls anyway, and that had told her something nothing else could have. She would tell him tomorrow. Tonight she picked up her spoon and ate her jjigae and hummed something under her breath, without realizing she was doing it, something half-remembered, off-key, her grandmother's church. And across the table, Choi Gil-soo said absolutely nothing, and looked at his bowl and was, for the first time in longer than he could account for, entirely at peace. She told him in the morning. Not dramatically, not with the preparation of a planned speech. She had learned somewhere between signing his contract and this kitchen at 7 a.m. that planned speeches were not the language this man responded to. What he responded to was precision, directness, the thing said plainly without performance. So she poured 2 cups of coffee, his black, hers with enough sugar that Soon-yi had stopped commenting, set one in front of him, and sat down. "I knew about the clause," she said. 3 days ago. Tasha found the column and I read it and I didn't say anything." He looked at her over his coffee cup. "I wanted to see what you would do," she said. "Whether you would tell me, whether you would come home and set out 2 bowls, or whether you would—" She stopped. "Whether you would be the person I thought you were or the person I was afraid you were." A pause. "And?" "You set out 2 bowls," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You were testing me." "Yes." "For 3 days." "Yes." Something moved across his face. Not quite amusement, not quite exasperation, the particular expression she had catalogued in the studio on the first day, and still did not have a precise name for. That is, he stopped. Calculating, she offered. I was going to say fair, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. I should have told you about the clause from the beginning, he said. The commission was real. The work was real. You deserve to know the full picture regardless. A pause. I won't ask you to forgive that on my timeline. I'm not forgiving it on your timeline, she said. I'm forgiving it on mine. Are you forgiving it? She picked up her coffee. I'm considering it seriously, she said. That's more than I've given most people. He nodded. Once. And she understood that for Choi Gil-soo, that landed exactly as it was meant to, not as consolation, but as the thing it actually was, a door, open. An invitation, extended. The beginning of something that had already, quietly, irrevocably begun. The Choi Family Foundation Gala was that Saturday. Nia had known about it for 3 weeks. She had a dress, not the midnight blue, not the burnt orange, something new. She had been working on it in the studio for the past 10 days, late at night after Gil-soo had gone to bed, the Han River keeping her company through the window. Ivory silk base, hand-blocked in a deep garnet pattern she had designed around a motif her grandmother used to call the returning, a shape that came apart and came back together, depending on how the light moved across it. She finished it the morning of the gala. She was still at the work table, thread in hand, when Gil-soo appeared in the studio doorway. He looked at the dress on the form. He looked at it for a long moment, the way he had looked at the indigo piece on the first day. Careful, unhurried, reading it the way he read things that mattered. The motif, he said. What do you call it? The returning, she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, because some things don't need to be said to be understood. The gala was held at the Choi family estate in Seongbuk-dong, a property that managed to be simultaneously enormous and restrained, in the way of old Korean wealth that had never needed to announce itself. Nia had been to fundraising events in Atlanta. She had been to gallery openings and pop-up launches and creative industry mixers where everyone was performing something. This was different. This was a room full of people who had known each other for decades, who had opinions about each other that predated their ability to form memories, and who had been waiting since Wednesday's photograph to form an opinion about her. She felt it the moment they walked in, the shift in attention. Subtle, collective, the way a room of people trained in discretion registers something new without appearing to. Gil-soo's hand was at the small of her back, not the careful professional placement of the foundation preview, something different, something that said, I know exactly where I am, and I am here on purpose. She stood straight, chin level, the garnet pattern catching the light the way she had designed it to, coming apart and coming back together, returning, returning, returning. A woman materialized at Gil-soo's left, 60, elegant, with the posture of someone who had never once in her life slouched and the eyes of someone who had been forming assessments since before Nia was born. Gil-soo's mother, Choi Yeon-ju. Gil-soo-ya, she said, and then her eyes moved to Nia with the focused precision of a woman who had prepared something to say. She didn't say it, because at that exact moment, from across the room, a voice cut through the ambient noise of 200 people. Nia, she turned. Choi Dae-jung was standing 20 feet away, with a glass in his hand, and an expression that had several things moving through it simultaneously. Recognition, calculation, something that in a more self-aware man might have been shame. The room did not go quiet, but it tilted. Gil-soo's hand did not move from the small of her back. If anything, it settled. Dae-jung crossed toward them. He was dressed impeccably, as always. His smile was the practiced, undisturbed smile she remembered from Jean's, the one that stayed in place regardless of what was happening underneath it. Nia, he said again, stopping in front of her. You look He paused. His eyes moved over the dress, over her. You look incredible. She held his gaze. Thank you, she said, pleasantly, without warmth. I've been hoping we could talk, he said. I owe you an apology. What I said at John's was… Daejung, Gilsu's voice, quiet, level. The single word landing with the weight of everything it contained. Daejung looked at his brother. She doesn't need your apology tonight, Gilsu said. She doesn't need anything from you tonight. Hyung, I'm just… She's not here for you, Gilsu said. She's never been here for you. The silence that followed had a particular quality, the kind that happens when something true is said plainly in a room full of people who have spent years saying nothing plainly. Daejung looked at Nia one more time, and she saw it, finally, fully, without any performance attached. The thing she had needed to see not for revenge, but for resolution. He understood. He understood what he had thrown away, and why he had thrown it away, and that there was no version of this evening in which he got to undo it. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt clean. Enjoy your evening, she said, and turned back to the room. Choi Yeon-ju had watched all of this. She watched her younger son walk away. She watched her older son's hand remain exactly where it was. She watched the woman in the ivory dress, with the garnet pattern stand in the middle of her family's home, like she had always known where she belonged. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she turned to Nia and said in careful, precise English, Your dress is exceptional. Nia met her gaze. Thank you. I made it myself. Something moved through Choi Yeon-ju's expression that her older son would have recognized immediately, the almost not quite thing, the weather passing. She held Nia's gaze for one moment longer than courtesy required. Then she moved on into the room. An hour later, near the end of the evening, Nia was standing at the edge of the terrace looking out at the Seongbuk-dong skyline when she felt a presence beside her. She turned. Choi Yeon-ju, without Gilsu, without anyone. She stood beside Nia and looked out at the city for a moment in silence. The particular silence of a woman who chooses her words the way other people choose weapons, carefully and with full understanding of their weight. Then she said, without looking at her, He used to come home late, every night, for years. I stopped expecting him before midnight. A pause. He has been home by 8 for 2 months. Nia said nothing. I notice things, Yeonju said. It is a family trait. She glanced at Nia then, brief, direct, the assessment complete. The motif on your dress. My mother had a name for that pattern. She did not say what it was. She walked back into the room and did not look back. And Nia stood on the terrace with the Seoul skyline spread before her, and her heart doing something large and unmanageable in her chest, and understood, without anyone explaining it, without translation, without a single additional word, that she had just been welcomed into something. Not loudly, not warmly, not in any language she had been taught to recognize, but completely. Gilsu found her on the terrace 2 minutes later. My mother spoke to you, he said. It was not a question. Yes. For how long? A few minutes. He studied her face. What did she say? Nia looked at him, at the man who had watched her walk out of a restaurant and found her name by morning, who had built her a studio at exactly the right height and eaten jjigae he could not tolerate and kept a thimble from Atlanta in his desk drawer for a year, who had come home early, every night, for 2 months, to hear her hum. She said you've been coming home by 8, Nia said. Something moved across his face, the almost not quite thing, the weather. Nia, I know, she said. He stopped. She looked at him the way she had looked at the indigo piece when it was finished, when the pattern had finally resolved into the thing it had been trying to become all along. I know, she said again, quietly, without hesitation, without apology. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, set the brass thimble on the terrace railing between them, small, hand-stamped, flowers slightly uneven the way things are when someone makes them by hand. She looked at it, looked at him. "I thought I'd add it to the case tonight," he said. She picked it up, turned it in her fingers, set it back down. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. His hand found hers on the railing, not a grand gesture, not a performance for the 200 people inside. Just his hand and hers in the dark above a city that had been indifferent to both of them, until somehow it wasn't. She didn't pull away. She hummed something under her breath, without realizing it, off-key, her grandmother's church. He listened. Below them Seoul kept its lights burning, indifferent and magnificent, and the Han River moved the way it always moved, without asking permission, without explaining itself, certain that everything eventually finds its way to the water. It's been a journey, friends. Thanks for sticking around till the end. I appreciate you. If you'd like more Afro-Korean romance stories like this, feel free to subscribe.